try to behave for the whole thing. Action!
First, I'm going to have you introduce yourself and your project, Church Burglars.
Okay, well, hello. My name is Michael Foltz, and I'm a musician, the songwriter and frontman extraordinaire, I guess, of Church Burglars. Yeah, what do you want to know about me? I'm from Pennsylvania. Grew up in Pennsylvania, moved to Los Angeles in January 2021, middle of the pandemic, like an Einstein that I am. Middle of the COVID pandemic, I moved to Los Angeles, and I've just been rocking and rolling ever since.
How did Church Burglars specifically begin? Like, where did the idea for it come from?
So, are you asking about the songs or like I guess, when did I decide I wanted to do this? I guess that's the same answer.
All of the above.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of the same answer, I guess. So, when I was young, like as a kid, I was always writing songs. And then, the name Church Burglars came from a group of guys in high school I was playing with, just kind of jamming with on Tuesday nights. We needed gear for our rehearsal space because we were just in my friend Grayson's attic basically, and we didn't have anything. So my regular gig through high school was playing drums at my church every Sunday, and so I said, I know where we can get a drum set, I know where we can get a PA, I know where we can get everything we need.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked the music director, like, hey, could I borrow this extra drum set that we have in this storage closet? Because my church, St. Paul's Lutheran Church in Lionville, they would do musicals in the wintertime for like the youth program. And so they had like a whole theater production worth of stuff that sat dormant for 80% of the year. And so my thought was, I can just borrow it, and then when they need it, I'll just give it back. But they never needed the stuff back because they stopped doing the musicals. And so I still have most of the stuff.
Well, but mine now.
But church borrowers didn't sound very rock and roll, so we went with Church Burglars.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where the name comes from. The songs, specifically for this album, a lot of them I wrote in high school. Some of them I wrote in my first, really my first semester at Berklee College of Music. Most of them I wrote in high school, though. Subconsciously Conscious was high school. Distant Memory was high school. Stabbed in the Back was high school. Bruises in My Mind was high school. Today was high school. Breathe was high school. So I wrote these songs when I was like 15, 16 years old.
So you wrote and produced this album all by yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and these are songs that you wrote when you were 15, 16. What experiences informed these songs, and what ultimately led to the choice of doing it all yourself, making it a DIY album?
Okay, so I'll answer the first part of the question. The first part of the question was like, what made these songs? Like, what was the inspiration behind these songs? Kind of vibe. The ones I wrote in high school was just high school angst. I was very unhappy in high school because when I was in high school, like, I knew I wanted to be a musician. I knew that from the time I was like 12, I knew I want to be a musician. I want to rock and roll. That's what I want to do. But I still had to go to school. And I was really unhappy with the high school I was in because there were other musicians there, but none of them really took it seriously like I did. Like, there were other musicians there who would like get together and like play cover songs or whatever, and like that just wasn't my thing. Like, I wanted to be an artist. I didn't want to just play other people's songs. It's still a problem I have even today. Like even because I was still do a lot of like session drumming stuff and session guitar playing and stuff like that. I don't feel the same creative um, release of playing other people's stuff that I do from playing my own stuff. It's just a different feeling that I get from playing my own songs. So what came from writing the songs is what how I got into basically producing the thing on my own. So at first, when I was in Berkeley, I was working with a producer, Ricardo from AME Studios in Boston. Shout out to him, fantastic producer. The problem was in the middle of recording was when COVID happened. So we stopped recording. We got kicked out of the dorms. Like I had to leave Boston within like 3 days. So that just disrupted the whole recording process. We were, I think, almost done or completely done with like the basic recording, but then there was all like the extra stuff that like I was trying to do remotely and it just wasn't quite working. So I told him, like, thanks for everything you've done, but I'm just gonna basically start over again. And because it was things like because I was playing everything on it. I did all the drums, I did most of the guitars, the bass, sang everything, and everything's like, well, I want to redo like one of the drum takes on something because it just I know I could play it better after having done the song and putting all this other stuff on it. I'd listen back to the drum take and say, well, the drum take isn't up to my standards. And the problem was now I was, across the country, so it didn't quite work. So I said, I'm just going to scrap everything, start again. And that's what I did. I started with the drums, and I really focused in on getting the takes that I wanted, really, really good takes. And because the thing that I like about older records is the realness of them, the human element. Because when you record on tape, you can't like quantize things, you can't auto tune things like everything is today. It's not digitized in that way where you can go in and micro edit everything. You can cut takes and splice takes together, but you still have to know how to sing. Like when you listen to like Led Zeppelin, like that's Robert Plant singing. When you listen to the Rolling Stones, like that's Keith Richards playing guitar. Like however many takes they did, I don't know, but at the end of the day, like that's a real person doing a real thing. And I like that. So even though I recorded the whole thing digitally, I just used GarageBand, which is a free software. Even though I recorded the whole thing digitally, I still made myself have those restraints. So I basically treated the digital uh, software like it was a reel-to-reel tape machine. And so if I wanted to change something, I had to like cut in a whole take. I couldn't just go in and edit it. There were a lot of times, especially when I was singing, where I was like, oh man, it'd be so easy to just auto-tune it. Like I could just, because there's just one button, I just click it and then it just does it. And I'm like, but I would know if I did that and I wouldn't be happy with it if I did that. So it kind of sucks a little bit, but I like it. It's got that real energy to it, which you don't get with stuff that's quantized and all of this nonsense. So why I did it on my own? Because I was broke and I couldn't really pay someone to help me. I'd always been fiddling around with GarageBand as, like, I say a kid, but in like middle school and high school. I was always into recording. When I grew up taking drum lessons with Glenn Farrakhan, he had a studio of his own, so I kind of grew up in like a studio setting. I was playing on records when I was like 13, 14 years old. So I was familiar with recording. I wasn't going in completely blind, just figuring it out, but making a record, I was kind of just going in blind, figuring it out. I just use my own judgment of, do I like this? Do I not like this? If I like it, don't touch it. If I don't like it, figure out how to change it. So it was partially for the fun of it, I guess.
Is there anything about your recording process that you feel is unorthodox?
Everything is unorthodox. Like, I'm because I don't know really anything. I know enough to know I don't know anything. And
Explain that a little more.
so one of my favorite quotes is about Orson Welles when he was making Citizen Kane. And it was one of his, like, director of photography or whatever told him, "You don't know what can't be done." And that's kind of the way I went in. Like, I took like one drum recording lab at Berkeley, but I didn't have the same access to microphones and 30 channels like they had there. So I was like, well, I know you mic the kick and snare and you put some overheads up. I know enough about phasing, so when I would put the overheads up, I'd measure from the snare drum with just an extra cable just to make sure it's not out of phase. A lot of YouTube tutorials of, me listening back to the drum recording I got and going, well, that doesn't sound good. Why does it not sound good? And a lot of times it was from my own playing. Like, when you record in a real environment like that where you're not constantly like pitch shifting things and correcting things, like, the recording doesn't lie. When you press record and then stop and listen back, it's gonna tell you what you did. So it was a lot of, I don't want to say self-loathing, but a lot of, like, basically taking off my artist hat of this is my own work, this is my passion, and putting on my producer hat of, okay, did I actually do a good take? Like, really looking at it completely objectively and saying, is this something that I would want on my record? If, this recording I'm listening to was a session musician I hired, would it pass my radar? And a lot of times it didn't, and I'm like, well, we got to do it again. And so it was a lot of that, a lot of the extra sound bits in it, like stabbed in the back, like the part that almost sounds like a trombone, like the wop wop wow 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 wow, was me literally just doing that into a microphone and like double tracking it, and I'd put like some phasers on it so it kind of sounded like something cool. It's because I wanted a trombone but didn't know how to play trombone or have a trombone, so I just made up the sound because I'd listen to the song and be like, well, it kind of needs like a wow wow. And I'm like, well, I can just go up to the mic and give it a little wow wow. Or
you can just do that.
Yeah, you can just do that. Or Two Roads, for example. A lot of the extra percussion stuff on the chorus is like me tapping on a water bottle. Like I have a water bottle right here, which makes a little makes a little tone to it. I could use that in a song, or like if I have steak seasoning, because I don't have money to buy like a $40 shaker or something, so I'll just use steak seasoning from the kitchen and just turn up the microphone really high. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. I didn't know how to mic drums, guitars, so it was just putting mics up, hearing how it sounds, and changing it from there.
So there's a lot of experimentation involved, but you also have very, very high standards for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is, and do you think, as compared to other artists, you may have higher standards for yourself than they do for themselves?
I think anyone who reaches any degree of satisfaction in their own work has high standards. Like, if you get to the point of putting out your own work, it's because you have high standards. It's a mix of having it's a mixture of having high standards, but also having the discipline to reach those standards, because if you just have high standards but don't have the willpower to actually like make those high standards real, then you just have high standards. But if you put in the work to recognize where your own flaws are and then actively try to correct them as you're doing the thing, that's where uh, the magic happens. And it's not, I guess, why do I have high standards? It's because when I was making this record, I was making this in my bedroom. I didn't want to think to myself, like, I want this to be the best record that anyone at Berklee College of Music is making right now. I didn't want to think that. I wanted to think, this is going to be the best record in the world. So, my, I don't like the word competition, but my comparison was my favorite bands. It was the Foo Fighters. It was Queen. It was Pink Floyd. It was Guns N' Roses. It was Aerosmith. That was the stuff I was listening to compare my mixes and say, okay, is what I'm making up to par with what I love? Is it on the same playing field? Because I didn't want to lower my expectations. Like, well, this is my first record. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing it on my own. Like, it's okay if it's not great. Like, no, I want it to be great. The resources behind it don't make it great. It's the art that makes it great.
I'm just writing some notes for questions I have for you. So, on your YouTube channel, you've talked about the sort of productivity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
How do you apply that to musicians in particular, say yourself, but also as an active member of your geographical music scene?
Mm-hmm.
How does that come into play?
So the effort crisis comes from a lot of people, and I could go off about like technology and how it's affecting our brain chemistry, blah blah blah, but basically when I talked before about having the willpower to make your high standards come to fruition, that is the thing that we are generally losing, which is people having, like, making this album from start to finish. When I first started recording in Boston with Ricardo to when I put it out was 2 years, because I worked on it for a year, scrapped the entire thing, and then started again. If you're waiting for that quick result of, oh, I'm going to make an album, like, it's not quick. It's not a quick process. If you want to make something great, it's not a quick process, which is part of the reason why I didn't want to just make singles, because singles to me that don't lead anywhere, I don't want to say they don't mean anything, because the art itself means something, but it just, the comparison I use is that Stephen King doesn't put out one chapter of a book. He writes the whole book, and he puts out the whole book. I didn't want to write one song and put out one song. I wanted to put out a body of work. It's like, this is, because when you listen to the songs too, they sound wildly different. Part of the thing too is, like, I don't even know what single I could put out that would encompass everything I'm trying to actually say sonically and lyrically and blah blah blah. So putting out just one single or even a handful of singles wouldn't have worked. Like, if I didn't just put this all out as an album, I would have put all of these out as a single and then packaged them together as an album. Just because they mean something together. Together they have a different context than separately. So productivity crisis, you really have to want this. Not just music or whatever, but any long-term project, you have to know it's long-term. Like, discipline beats motivation is, I forget who said that. It was probably some YouTuber or a podcast or something I was listening to, but you're only going to be motivated and inspired to make something for the first 5, if you're lucky, 10% of the time. The other 90% that gets you across the finish line is just discipline. Like really doing the thing because you love doing it. And there were a lot of days where like I knew the deadline was coming up because I announced the release of this before it was done as a way to like get myself to do it. And then when I did that, I was like, okay, fucking date's coming up. We still got how many songs to do? All right. I guess today I'm working. And part of it is work, but it's work I love, so it doesn't feel like work. I would rather drive myself crazy because I get into mad scientist mode. I'd rather lose sleep and be this crazy mad scientist who's a hermit locked in his room, not talking to anybody, not interacting with people because he's working on this, than go to a 9 to 5. I'd rather do that. I'd rather this drive me crazy than just be comfortable with a 9 to 5.
So, on that note, controversial question, maybe. Do you think far too many artists get trapped in this sort of 9 to 5 pipeline? Because we all know the age-old saying, don't quit your day job.
Yeah.
Every artist, every creative person has been told that at some point.
Yeah.
Do you believe that?
This is where I give advice with a grain of salt. If you have a plan B, you're preparing for failure. If you don't at some point say, fuck it, I'm going to move across the country and make this happen. I'm going to make this happen. It's not going to be handed to you, but I'm going to make this happen. Then there is no plan B. I don't have a plan B. There is no finish line either. Like, I say my goal as an artist is to be the most successful musician of all time. I want every single person in the world to be a Church Burglars fan. That's a nearly impossible goal, but not impossible. Like, there's no laws of nature preventing that from happening. It's just a very, very lofty goal. So the finish line exists, but
it's indefinite.
It's indefinite, yeah. And, you know, when it comes to, you know, getting in the 9 to 5 rut, like, you have to love this. You have to love this enough to do the things you don't like doing to make it happen. Like, I said this was a 2-year process. If I didn't like this, it wouldn't have happened. Because I didn't want to scrap the whole thing and start over. I went back and forth on it, but I finally was like, you know what, I'm just gonna hate it if I don't start over. Like, if I don't start over, it's just not gonna be what I want it to be. And so I did. I was like, this is the harder way to go, but it's the right thing to do. So.
And so what do you think of the final result?
I still don't think it's done. I don't think it's done, but I had a deadline that I set. So when I listen to it now, I enjoy the process of it. There's a lot of things I would change on it, but I couldn't make it sound like this again. If you gave me $20 million to make this again, it wouldn't sound like this. Because this has a magic to it that only someone who doesn't know what they're doing could make. Even if you gave me the same resources, the same conditions, now I have a little bit more understanding of what I'm doing because I made this. So it wouldn't sound like this. This is special because I really didn't know what I was doing.
It's the guinea pig.
Yeah. It's this beautiful guinea pig that I've created and just given out to the world.
I think maybe the guinea pig practice is sort of lost on this generation of artists because far too often. We're seeing on social media, that's the primary problem, I think, for creatives now, is there's far too much of an emphasis on the highlight reel,
Yeah.
on what is
Yeah.
presentable to the public, what looks sparkly, what looks perfect.
Yeah, there's no, like, Instagram and TikTok and all that, it doesn't lend itself to a DIY anything. Like, everyone on everyone on Instagram expects you to know what you're doing. Expects you at least to pretend you know what you're doing and look like you know what you're doing. Because Instagram isn't real. TikTok isn't real. It's a social media that's obstructed our construct of reality. And I don't like it. I'm on Instagram and I'm on TikTok, but anyone who looks at my posts, especially my reels, like, they're shit. The videos I make on my YouTube channel are kind of shitty. It's just me talking about stuff.
But see, that's the important milestone that I think is necessary, but also prevents a lot of creatives from putting their work out there. Not only, like we've talked about, there's the effort crisis, which, granted, there's a time investment, there's a monetary investment involved in creating anything.
Mm-hmm.
Let it be a painting, an album, a film, etc. That's something people aren't willing to put in anymore, or at least not as often, I think.
Yeah.
Soapbox moment. That's a product of the social media itself. It's sort of like an Ouroboros kind of thing.
That's a big word, I don't know.
Eats its own tail.
Oh, yeah.
It presents the problem to begin with, the effort crisis,
Mm-hmm.
because of said highlight reels that produce a populace that compares itself to that. And that's where you get a lot of identity crises.
Oh, yeah. Like, a good example I can use of, not to completely go askew from what you just said, but to kind of highlight that of why it's okay to suck at something and why it's okay to not have this polished thing.
That's the milestone. You have to suck before you're good, and you have to be good before you're great.
Yeah. You have to walk before you can run. Every rose has its thorn.
Mm-hmm.
You can't always get what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Don't stop believing. Living on a prayer. Whatever other song lyrics you want.